welcome to Making Known the Unknown. I'm your host, Tina Tarryk, and with me today are Reverend Carl Hewitt, medium and founder of Gifts of the Spirit Church. Welcome, Carl.
Thank you.
And Sydney Schwartz, teacher, Bible researcher from Hackensack, New Jersey. Welcome, Sydney.
Hi, Tina.
Both of these gentlemen are authors of the book My First Encounter with an Angel, Revelations of Ancient Wisdom. And in this show today, which we are calling The Soul Part 3, we will be diving into a connection, if there is a connection, between what is known as the soul, and we've discussed this in previous shows, and the brain. And primarily, or the first focus I would like to, or the first direction I'd like to go in with this, is that we've understood that the soul is a type of a recorder in the body, and it actually records knowledge. And of course, one of the first things that came to my mind is that, well, what do we have a brain for? And then the thought was, is there a connection between the soul and the brain? So with that, I'm going to direct this to Carl, if he would begin, and shed some light on that. Is there a connection between the soul and the brain?
There's a big connection. Your brain is nothing but a receiver. That's all it is a receiver. The soul is really made up of energy, and it's right behind the breastbone in a cavity of the chest, and it records everything that we ever do, everything, regardless of what it is. And the soul does not know right from wrong, so it records everything, never judges. And even the amount of hair we have on our head is recorded in the soul, what we look like. And I always describe the soul as something similar to a recorder and camera, because evidently it starts recording what we look like from the time we're born all the way till the time we're 27 to 30, and then it stops. And then when we die, our body never looks over 30 years old, regardless if the person lives to be 100. It never looks over that age. And so the brain, as I said before, is a receiver. And the soul, as I said before, records everything. And the soul, if you really want to break it down, would be the modus operandi of the entire body. Everything about our body is recorded in the soul. And as I said before, it's a massive recorder. This is why, for instance, when a person goes to a genuine medium, and that person would say, well, I have Aunt Tilly here. Well, the woman said, well, that was my mother's sister, that was my aunt. And there's other information coming through. Well, it's because Aunt Tilly, her soul, recorded everything that she ever did. This is why when you see people such as John, what's his name on TV?
John Edwards.
John Edwards on TV, and he's able to tell the people there about other people that have been dead. It is because they're still alive, but not in a physical body. They are in a spirit body, a body of energy, but they still recall everything they've ever done. So they can only communicate with the medium, the person who has the gift of the Spirit.
Think about it, Tina. If your brain was the source of where you stored knowledge, when a person dies, that brain goes into the ground in the casket, okay? And so that the person would get to the spirit world, they wouldn't have any knowledge. Aunt Tilly wouldn't know what happened to her during her life to be able to tell the medium. So,
Right.
the memory is really stored in the soul, and the soul goes on and continues its life in the other dimension, and that's how Aunt Tilly remembers her earth life and can describe it to the medium.
So when somebody refers to someone as you're a very smart person, a very intelligent person, does that mean intelligence of the soul? Does that mean intelligence of the brain? Where do you suppose that would come from?
Well, basically the intelligence again would be probably from both. The knowledge is being stored in the soul, which is in the chest, but the brain's like a processor. Okay. The brain has lots of different centers in it. For example, if I'm using my eyes and I see an image, that those waves are coming from those light waves are bouncing off that camera I'm looking at, and they're coming into my eyes, and they're going up the optic nerve into a certain center of the brain, and the brain interprets what I'm seeing and knows that I'm looking at a camera. Okay? A person who's a medium will see something clairvoyantly with his spirit eyes or her spirit eyes, and that has a different feed-in into the optic nerve and into that same center. So the same center is being used to interpret things, but there's a different connection from a different set of eyes.
So is this what you might be referring to when you talk about the third eye, when we talk about a third eye?
Yes.
In our forehead?
Yes.
What is that?
It's actually down in here, down here,
Okay.
down here,
All right.
right there. And it's what people have always thought of as the third eye, but it's really the spirit eyes that's seeing that, the spirit eyes. You see, there are many chambers up here, many chambers, and most of those chambers are shut down. There's a chamber for healing, for you to do healing. There's a chamber for you to do remote viewing, seeing in another time. And there's another chamber for you to receive messages from the other dimensions and pass it on to the person in front of you. But down through the ages, we're going way back now, they started telling people that, look, this is the work of the devil. And the work of the devil, and even the thought of that, is just like a virus that's in a computer. You see what I mean? It shuts the computer down. So any fear, anything of fear that's recorded in our soul keeps a person from hearing the voices as I hear them.
See, when man was first created, man's brain was working at 100%.
100%.
The whole entire brain was working. And today we know that only about 10% of the brain is operational. And if someone's really a genius, it might get up to 30%. So all this other parts of the brain that have atrophied over the years from non-use were for using the gifts of the Spirit. Right behind your ears, most people have behind their ear. And that's where, underneath that bump, is where the centers are for clairaudience,
Yeah.
hearing spirits' voices.
Okay.
If that was activated, as it is with Reverend Hewitt, he can hear the voices of spirit. Mine aren't working, and I don't hear the voices. So all through the brain, there are so many gifts of the Spirit, as we've been talking about. Each part has its own center of the brain that was working. And years ago, people could use this. In fact, Awan explained to us that if the ancient Egyptians built the pyramids, as everybody knows, and everybody's wondering how they did it.
Right.
They did it because their brains were operating 100%. And what they would do is that they would take this big stone block, and they were using their mind, they would concentrate on it, and as you know, all matter is made up of atoms, and all atoms are moving all the time. Well, they would take the atoms that were in this rock, and they'd make them go a little bit faster, and a little bit faster, and faster, and faster, and faster, and it gets to a point that the atoms are moving so fast that the block loses its gravitational pull on the ground, and it will begin to float. And then with their mind, they move the block into place, and then they allowed it to go back to its natural vibrational rate, and that's how they built the pyramids, using their minds.
So you mean to tell me, if we're only, and I have heard this and have read this, that we only use a certain percentage of our brain, I think it's common knowledge, that at one point we could all use 100% of our brain.
Absolutely.
Yes.
And those areas would be for doing things like the gifts of the Spirit.
Like the gifts of the Spirit, but there were other benefits of having your brain 100% operational. One of them is that you wouldn't have any diseases. You would live for as long as you wanted to live. And then when you got tired of living and decided you wanted to go off into another dimension, you simply, as the Egyptians raised the frequency of the stone, you would raise the vibrational rate of your body, and you would ascend into another dimension, taking your body with you. Now, in the Bible, there's evidence of the people living with their brain fully operational. And in Genesis, in chapter 5, many people are mentioned. Methuselah was one of them. He lived 969 years. And again, if your brain is operational, you have no disease because your body's producing protein, and disease has to have an acid base in order to survive in the body. So if your body's making constant protein, no disease can live in it, and you can live it as long as you want to.
You see, there's a gland right here in everyone. It's called the thymus. Okay. It was created in the beginning of all beginnings to produce protein for the body. And if it's working full blast, it's producing protein for the body, and there's no disease on the planet, even man-made diseases, that can live in this body if protein is being produced in the body, you see? And the thing is, there's a little portion of the brain that acts as a switch on-off, right? It's a portion of the brain that does not work today, because there's a lot of this brain that don't work. And when that little part of the brain is not working, then the thymus is not working. But yet when we're born, the thymus is working, and somewhere it does definitely shut down when we go through puberty. Absolutely shuts down completely. But take some of the small children, the children are being born now. In fact, I know of a few of them that's being born now. The chances of them living forever is very good, because I have seen some of these children, and I can tell that it's either 100% of the brain is working or very close to it. That little boy that's on TV, I think his name is Jeff Smith, he graduated from college at 11 years old. Right. Well, for instance, if his brain is working 100%, which I think it is, then when he gets to be about 19 or 20, when our bodies normally stopped growing, you understand?
Right.
His body not only will stop growing, but it will stop aging at that point, because this is producing protein. And it's simply because the brain is shut down. After all this time, the brain is shut down.
So now, that brings up a lot of questions.
Why
questions. Is the brain shut down? What happened to us?
It's programmed.
Programmed?
Remember,
how?
we're talking here about the soul and about the brain, okay? The soul, as we said, is a recorder, and it handles everything, even to us using the term nature calls. It's programmed in the brain, in the soul. It's programmed in the soul.
Okay. Right.
So, if a person like ourselves, if we're programmed to believe that the devil is real, you see what I mean? That's programmed in the soul. And the way we could get rid of this programming is to go into what we term a prayer mode or meditation, putting blinders on so nothing is interfering with or showing through the eyelids. And then we visualize the light around the body, which is the light of God, and not visualize somebody out there in a piece of real estate in the sky. And if we say, Lord God of my being, unto the Father within, come forward and erase this from my soul now and forevermore. And we keep saying that continually, and eventually, it would be just like we take a pencil and erase something that we wrote. Eventually, it's not there anymore. It's gone.
No.
Then your body starts changing.
So something about what you had just said reminded me of something that I have experienced when I had gone to your church. And in fact, you had people do this exercise,
yes,
where they visualized the light around them, and then they repeated those words after you.
That's exactly the same thing that Jesus taught his students in the upper room. I know some people out there that sees this program is going to argue about this, but they can't prove it, they can't disprove it. What I am sharing with you people tonight in front of these cameras is not coming from my thoughts or not from a book. It's coming from another dimension of people that still live in another dimension. They lived here, but they're living now in another body. That second body that they've been telling us about. We're born with two bodies.
So Jesus' brain was working at 100%.
100%.
Yes, that's why he did all the gifts of the Spirit.
And he tried to teach his disciples.
Yes.
Yes.
To open their brains.
Yes.
Or expand.
He wanted
their
them.
minds?
He wanted them to learn everything he was teaching, the phenomena, and also the sciences. And once they learned that, he was going to send them out, and each one select another 12 people, and eventually the whole world would understand the gifts of the Spirit, and there would be peace on this earth. But no, what he taught As far as I'm concerned, Christianity threw the baby out with the bathwater. Instead of following his teachings and teachings the gifts of the Spirit, which is something, all religion, they don't even touch it. They don't want to. There's too much money pouring in.
But you're doing that. You were doing that. I know that I have not been to that church all the time on a regular basis, and I know that I see different people from time to time who come there, and you do the same thing with everyone, regardless of who is there.
That's right.
So it appears to me you are attempting, or you're.
I'm trying to
do the same thing.
I'm trying to teach what he tried to teach. You see, this is why he's appeared to me so many times. This is why he's appeared to me in the pictures. This is why he appeared to me in the real. I've even almost argued with him that I really believe that A1 and Jesus are one and the same, but he says no. He says no, can't be.
Oh, he once said he wasn't during his first encounter with you.
So this angel that appeared to me in the pictures, the one over the land that I bought, it was all gold. The whole thing in the picture was gold. It looked like it was done with an expensive camera. And then a few days later, the angel appeared to him in a different mode. It was a man walking towards him. For instance, he was like he had the camera, and this angel walking towards him. And yet the wings on this particular angel, because we're all taught that there are angels with wings, that is not correct at all. It's only an image.
Really?
But both of these are the one and the same, the one that appeared to me and the one that appeared to him.
So there are a couple of things you touched upon here. So our brains were operating at 100%, say, many lifetimes ago?
Oh, yes.
At some point, all of us?
Yes.
Before the pyramids were built, they were working at 100%.
See, there were certain people who A1 calls tyrants, and they were the ones who became greedy, and they wanted to control people's minds. So they started off with all this negative intent, and they started teaching people that you shouldn't do this gift and you shouldn't do that gift because it's the work of some evil one. And that thought, being repeated over and over, eventually got recorded into the people's soul, and they began to do less and less gifts of the Spirit. And eventually, it got to the point where they did none of the gifts of the Spirit.
Well, why would anyone want to control anyone's mind? Why wouldn't everyone rejoice with the fact that your brain would be operating at 100% and we'd have these wonderful societies where people could help people, they could materialize things, they could create things? Why? What was the bonus for these so-called tyrants to do this?
That's the question that I ask, and this is the answer, and Sid can add to this. They told me that if we went all the way back, even before Jesus came to the world, there was this priest who would try his best to gather 60 to 70 followers. 60 to 70 followers could keep that priest in a very nice lifestyle. He would not have to worry about working, earning money or anything for food, place to live, everything, you see? And here was another priest over here that was doing the same thing. And the priest, the high priest that had the most followers, was considered a rich man. And so eventually it became an enormous business, and the priests wrote the rules. They wrote the rules. And so they control the people. And they keep saying today, I hear a lot of people saying that, Jesus is coming back. Well, if he came back, they can't afford to have him come back. I don't know of any minister or any one of the clergy that would really want him to come back, because if he came back, the donations would stop completely.
So the tyrants that you're speaking of are the priests?
The high priest.
They became the priests.
So
became the priest.
Millions of years ago, thousands of years ago, some point in history, priests decided that it was in their best interest
Oh, absolutely.
to do
Yes.
this.
They were on a roll.
And so people stopped thinking for themselves, I would suppose, or imagine, and stopped using their brains, and they just followed.
They just followed, correct.
What was their motivation to follow these priests? Why wouldn't they just say,
They had him.
I've got this 100% brain working?
They had him controlled.
They had them believing that if they committed a sin, the only way for them to be forgiven is to bring this little sheep or lamb and bring it to the priest, and the priest would slaughter it, put it on the altar, and sacrifice it to God, okay? And the person who committed the sins would go home, and the priest took the meat off the barbecue and have dinner. And so
Excuse me, make sure it was one that was not sick.
Yes, and it says in the 17th chapter of Deuteronomy, the very beginning, do not bring a ox or a sheep that has a blemish to the Lord, because he doesn't like it. The priest wanted the best of meat, and so they thought that they believed the priests when they said that they were the intermediary between God and the people, but it was actually the mediums who were. And in the Bible, it specifically says that in certain places. In Exodus chapter 33, verse 7 through 11, it talks about the people going to the meeting tent where they could ask Moses a question and get an answer from the Lord. Because there was a two-way conversation going there, where they could actually get a direct answer to their question. The priests couldn't do that. So that's why the priests hated the mediums, and they passed all these laws that people shouldn't go to mediums because they had the truth, while the priests could only fake it.
I see. So if we, I don't know if this is the connection exactly, but if we talk about the separation of church and state, does this, I know we have that agenda now that seems to be forever ongoing. Is that also something that was an influence by the priests versus maybe the kingdom or the people that lived there?
Well, you have to. If you go back to the Middle Ages, in order for a king to become king, he had to be a priest first. Yeah. So there was a connection between the state and religion. But this country, when it was founded, the people decided that the connection between the two was being hampered because there was so much persecution going on. If you didn't belong to the state-sponsored church, you would be persecuted. And many people came to the New World to escape that, so that's why they started to have the separation.
But you've got to remember one thing, Tina. The first religions were created by the governments. They created the religion in order to control or keep the people in check. And then
actually, it was the other way around. That it was the priests who were the government. And it was the priests who were the government for everybody. They were the ones to make the rules, and everybody, if there was any problems, they ran to the priest in order to solve it. And eventually, there was a separation between religion and the state, and that's when secular government was formed, the kings came about, and so forth.
But we got to bring money in here. These priests, the originators of the church, they wound up with more money than the governments had. And then eventually they wanted a divorce from the government because the government was controlling them, see? Okay. And so they separated, and this is where you come into the separation of church and state. Okay. Okay. And today, there's religions out there that are so wealthy. They have more money and wealth than anybody on the planet.
I've always wondered myself why some of the churches that I see look like castles, stone castles.
Yeah, right.
But I think you just answered that question because there's some history there when they were built.
Going way back when they told me that I am to organize the church and I'm to teach, and that all other things will be given unto me. Well, for many years, right on until the present time, the church has never taken enough money in to keep it going. So I've kicked in money to keep the doors open all the time. So I don't even give any thought because I know that the means will be there to take care of it.
Tina, I'd like to give another example of how the priests controlled what went into the Bible for their own agenda of preventing mediumship. In the Bible, it talks about the priests, which is called Kohanim in Hebrew. That word in Hebrew means a person with a familiar spirit or someone in the spirit world, an ancestral spirit that they could speak to. Familiar, a person from their own family. So they were the ones that were supposed to be gifted. Yet in the 21st chapter of Leviticus, it specifically says that the high priest and the priests were not to go to the cemetery for funerals or anything like that. And the reason for that was because if they went there, the people would ask a question. In other words, if your grandfather just died, and you went to the cemetery to bury him, okay, you'd want to know did his soul cross over into the spirit world safely and everything else. So naturally, you would want to ask the priest, who is the one that's supposed to be able to contact these people. But yet they were forbidden to go there because they didn't have the gift of the Spirit. And this way, no one would figure out that they weren't in communication with the world of the Spirit. Carl has done funerals where the person who's died, his spirit's right there talking to him while he's trying to give the eulogy. Tell him about that time.
It happened in Willimantic, in Groton, because the man that I was handling worked at Electric Boat, and his wife, the two of them never got along. They hated each other. And so there was a lot of people there at the funeral, and she was over there in the corner crying like crazy. And he appeared right side of me, and he said, "Tell her to shut up." And he was a dear friend of mine. We went fishing together a great deal. And it only proves that he was alive in another dimension, talking to me right there, and he'd only been dead 3 or 4 days.
And I'm sure he probably wasn't speaking to whoever else was there at the service.
Well, there were several people in the room
Yeah.
that saw the expression on my face, and they came up later and asked me, "We saw you coming close to bursting out laughing." And he said, did he appear to you? I said, "Yes, he did," and he told me to tell his wife to shut up.
Now, Sidney, you mentioned that there were examples in the Bible where people were told to be, I'm guessing, fearful or wary of
Yeah.
evil things or bad things. Did you want to share some of those with us?
Well, the book of Ephesians has many different quotes. One is in the second chapter, in the second verse, where in time past ye walked according to the course of the world, according to the prince of the power of the air, the spirit that now worketh in the children of disobedience. And another one in Ephesians chapter 6, verse 12, for we wrestle not against the flesh and blood, but against principalities, against powers, against the rulers of darkness of this world, against spiritual wickedness in high places. Why would they say that the people in the high level spirit world were wicked if they didn't want people to be afraid of the unseen? They were afraid that they wanted to make people afraid of the unseen so that they wouldn't contact the spirits, because people listening to the world of spirit would contradict the dogmas of the church.
Yeah.
And therefore they didn't want them. Yet in the Bible it tells you in 1 Timothy chapter 4 verse 14, neglect not the gift that is in thee, which was given to thee by prophecy with the laying on of the hands by the presbytery. So here they're telling you not to neglect your gifts. And 1 Thessalonians 5:16, it tells you to hold fast, rejoice evermore, pray without ceasing, and give thanks, for it is the will of God, according to quench not the spirit, despise not prophesying. Well, where is this prophecy going on in the churches today? Where do they not quench or stop the spirit from speaking? No, the spirits aren't speaking through most of the churches in the world today, because the priests won't let it, and they don't let it because they don't want to lose their income coming in.
So you're showing examples here right in the Bible where it contradicts itself.
Yes.
And it gives a very mixed message, and it would appear the priests could pull out whatever they wanted to.
Exactly.
And explain that to the people or convey that to the people. And all of this would appear to be still part of a bigger, I hate to say it, but conspiracy almost,
But
to
Jesus-
shut down people's brains.
Yes.
But Jesus said, know ye the truth, and it will set you free. What I teach, what we teach, when a person absorbs it, it will set them free from ignorance, fear, and superstition.
Thank you. Actually, that's the perfect ending for this show, The Soul Part 3. We're going to wrap up our show now. Thank you very much, Sidney Schwartz,
Thank you, Tina.
for being with us. And Reverend Hewitt, thank you again. And thank you.
Thank you.